The smell of burnt coffee and motor oil hung in my garage like a prayer nobody wanted to answer. I was elbow deep in rewiring Mrs. Henderson's ancient fuse box when my phone buzzed against the workbench. The text message that popped up made me drop my wire strippers. "I'm sleeping with your wife. Leave voluntarily or you'll regret it." Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. Unknown number. My first instinct was to laugh. Some punk kid probably got the wrong number. But something in my gut twisted like a live wire touching water. Nora had been working late at the law firm a lot lately. Real late. And her boss, Calvin Brooks, had been dropping her off more frequently, his silver Mercedes purring in our driveway like it owned the place. I'm Garrett Lane, 42 years old, licensed electrician for 18 years. I fix things that are broken. But standing there in my cluttered garage, staring at that message, I realized some things might be too broken to fix. "Dad, are you even listening?" Anna's voice cut through my thoughts. My 16-year-old daughter stood in the doorway, arms crossed, wearing that look of perpetual disappointment she'd perfected over the past year. "What's up, kiddo?" "Mom wants to know if you're coming to dinner. Calvin's here again, talking about some big case." Calvin, again. I pocketed my phone and followed Anna into the house, my boots heavy on the linoleum. Our duplex wasn't much to look at. Peeling paint, secondhand furniture, a lawn that gave up trying months ago. But it was ours. Or so I thought. In the dining room, Nora sat across from Calvin Brooks, her paralegal notebook spread between them like they were planning world domination. Calvin looked up when I entered, his smile sharp enough to cut glass. "Garrett, just the man I wanted to see." Calvin's voice carried that smooth attorney polish that made everything sound like a closing argument. "Nora was telling me about your electrical work. Must be satisfying, working with your hands." The way he said it made my skin crawl, like he was patting a dog on the head. "Someone's got to keep the lights on," I said, sliding into my chair. "What brings you by, Calvin?" "Oh, just going over some case files. Your wife's quite the asset to our firm." Asset. I watched Nora's face light up at the compliment, watched her lean forward just a little too much when Calvin spoke. The anonymous text burned in my pocket like a hot wire. After dinner, I retreated to my garage workshop. This was my sanctuary. Shelves lined with electrical components, tools organized with military precision, a mini fridge stocked with beer that actually stayed cold. I was sorting through a box of outlet covers when I heard voices outside. Through the window, I saw Nora walking Calvin to his car. They stood close, too close, her hand resting on his arm. When he leaned down to whisper something in her ear, she laughed. Not the polite laugh she gave me anymore, but the genuine one I remembered from our early years. Then he kissed her. Not a friendly peck. A real kiss. The kind that meant business. The kind that said the anonymous text wasn't from some punk kid with the wrong number. I stood there watching my wife kiss another man in our driveway, and something inside me snapped. Not broke, snapped, like an overloaded circuit finally giving up the ghost. I pulled out my phone and started recording. The next morning, I drove to Radio Shack and bought a small wireless camera. $29.99 for proof that my marriage was circling the drain. The clerk, a kid with more piercings than a pincushion, gave me a knowing look. "Cheating spouse?" he asked. Something like that. Been there, man. Pro tip. Hide it behind something they'd never move. Women always rearrange stuff. Smart kid. I installed the camera in my garage, tucked behind my toolbox where it had a clear view of the driveway. If Nora was going to parade her affair in front of our house, I wanted evidence. I didn't have to wait long. That evening, Calvin's Mercedes pulled up right on schedule. Through the camera's feed on my phone, I watched him get out, straighten his tie, and walk to our front door like he owned the place. When Nora answered, she was wearing her good dress, the black one she'd bought for our anniversary 2 years ago but never wore for me. They talked for a few minutes on the porch, then Nora glanced around and led him to his car. What happened next made my pressure spike. She slipped into the passenger seat, and Calvin drove them around the block. They parked under the streetlight 2 houses down, probably thinking they were being discreet. I grabbed my jacket and walked to Frankie's boxing gym 3 blocks away. I needed to hit something, and Frankie Dillard's heavy bags were cheaper than a divorce lawyer. "You look like someone stole your lunch money," Frankie said when I walked in. He was in his 50s, built like a fire hydrant, with hands that had seen their share of fights. The gym smelled like sweat and determination. Honest smells. Worse, someone stealing my wife. Frankie handed me a pair of gloves. "Want to talk about it or just bleed on my equipment?" I spent the next hour pounding the heavy bag, imagining Calvin's smug face with every punch. Frankie watched from his corner, occasionally calling out corrections to my form. When I finally stopped, my knuckles were raw and my shirt was soaked with sweat. "Feel better?" Frankie asked. "Not really." "Good. Means you're not crazy yet." He leaned against the ropes. "My ex-wife ran off with my business partner 20 years ago. Took half my money and all my pride. You know what I learned?" "What's that?" "Revenge is like electricity. It's got to have somewhere to go, or it'll burn your house down from the inside." I thought about that on the walk home. The Mercedes was gone, but Nora was in the kitchen, humming while she did dishes. She looked up when I entered, and for a second I saw guilt flicker across her face. "Where were you?" she asked. "Jim, where were you?" "Here, working on case files with Calvin." Lie number 1. I'd counted 3 more before she finished talking. That night, I reviewed the camera footage on my laptop. Clear as day, Nora getting into Calvin's car, driving away, returning an hour later with her lipstick smudged and her hair mussed. I saved the video to 3 different drives. The anonymous texts kept coming over the next few days. Calvin was getting bolder, more threatening. "Your wife deserves better than a blue-collar loser. She's already moved on. You should too. Don't make this harder than it has to be." Each message felt like a slap in the face, but they also gave me something valuable: Calvin's phone number. I ran it through a reverse lookup and got his full contact information, including his address and the name of his fiancée. Wait, fiancée? A quick Facebook search confirmed it. Calvin Brooks was engaged to a woman named Jennifer Walsh, a real estate agent with a perfect smile and a 3-carat diamond ring prominently displayed in her profile photos. Their engagement had been announced in the local paper just 6 months ago, so Calvin was cheating on his fiancée with my wife, who was cheating on me with him. The irony would have been funny if it wasn't destroying my life. I spent the weekend gathering more evidence: photos of Calvin's car in our driveway, screenshots of the text messages, a detailed log of his visits. I even followed them once to a motel on the edge of town, though I couldn't bring myself to go inside. By Sunday night, I had enough proof to bury both of them. The question was what to do with it. Monday morning, I made my decision. I printed out the best photos and screenshots, put them in a manila envelope, and drove to Calvin's law firm. The building was all glass and steel, the kind of place designed to intimidate people like me. The receptionist, a young woman with perfect teeth and a practiced smile, looked at me like I'd tracked mud on her Persian rug. "I'm here to see Mr. Brooks," I said. "Do you have an appointment?" "He's been texting me. I think he'll want to see this." I held up the envelope. She made a phone call, whispered something, then pointed toward the elevator. 15th floor, suite 1520. Calvin's office was bigger than my living room, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. He sat behind a mahogany desk that probably cost more than my truck, wearing a suit that screamed money. When I walked in, his confident smile faltered just a bit. "Garrett, this is unexpected." I dropped the envelope on his desk. "Open it." He did, and I watched his face go pale as he flipped through the photos. The one of him kissing Nora in our driveway. Screenshots of his text messages. A printed copy of the motel receipt I'd found in Nora's purse. "Where did you get these?" he asked, his voice tight. "Does it matter? The question is, what are we going to do about it?" Calvin leaned back in his chair, trying to regain his composure. "Look, Garrett, I understand you're upset." "Upset?" I laughed, and it came out harsher than I intended. "My wife is screwing around with a guy who's engaged to someone else, and you think I'm upset?" "I'm way past upset, Calvin. I'm in uncharted territory here." "What do you want?" "I want you to leave my wife alone. I want you to stop texting me like some teenage punk. And I want you to remember that I'm not going anywhere." Calvin's mask slipped completely then, revealing something cold and calculating underneath. "You're making a mistake, Garrett. I have resources you can't imagine, connections. I could make your life very difficult." "Is that a threat?" "It's a reality check. Nora's already told me she wants out of your marriage. She's just waiting for the right time. You could make this easy on everyone and just step aside." The words hit me like a punch to the gut, but I kept my face neutral. "Or what?" "Or I'll make sure you lose everything. Your business license, your reputation, maybe even access to your daughter. I'm very good at what I do, Garrett. Don't test me." I stood up slowly, my hands clenched into fists. For a moment, Calvin looked genuinely scared, and I realized he'd never been in a real fight in his life. All his battles were fought with paperwork and legal briefs. "You know what, Calvin? You're right about one thing. You are good at what you do, but I'm good at what I do too. And what I do is fix things that are broken. Sometimes that means rewiring the whole system." I left him sitting there with the photos spread across his expensive desk, his threats hanging in the air like smoke. That evening, I confronted Nora. I found her in our bedroom, getting dressed for another late night at the office. She was wearing perfume, the expensive kind she saved for special occasions. "We need to talk," I said. She glanced at me in the mirror, applying lipstick with practiced precision. "Can it wait? I have to get back to work." "It's about Calvin." Her hand froze halfway to her mouth. "What about Calvin?" I pulled out my phone and showed her the video from the garage camera. Her face went white as she watched herself kissing him in our driveway. "How long?" I asked. She set down the lipstick and turned to face me. For a moment, I thought she might deny it, make up some story about the video being doctored or taken out of context. Instead, she lifted her chin defiantly. 6 months. "Why?" "Because I'm tired of this." She gestured around our modest bedroom with its second-hand furniture and peeling wallpaper. "I'm tired of worrying about money. I'm tired of making excuses for why we can't afford nice things. I'm tired of being married to someone who's content to stay in the same place forever. I provide for this family. We have a roof over our heads, food on the table. We have the bare minimum, Garrett. Calvin can give me more than that. He can give Anna more than that. What about our marriage? What about the vows we made?" Nora laughed, but there was no humor in it. "What marriage? When's the last time we talked about anything that mattered? When's the last time you looked at me like I was more than just another appliance in this house?" Her words stung because there was truth in them. We had grown apart over the years, settling into a routine that felt more like roommates than lovers. But that didn't justify what she'd done. "So you decided to have an affair instead of talking to me about it?" "I decided to find someone who appreciates me, someone who has ambition beyond fixing broken outlets for the rest of his life." "And what about Anna? What about our daughter?" "Anna will understand. She already does, actually. She knows Calvin makes me happy in ways you never could." That hit me like a physical blow. "Anna knows?" "She's not stupid, Garrett. She can see that Calvin treats me better than you ever have. She wants me to be happy." I stared at my wife, my soon-to-be ex-wife, and realized I was looking at a stranger. The woman I'd married, the mother of my child, had been replaced by someone I didn't recognize. "What happens now?" I asked. "Now you make this easy on everyone and move out. Calvin has a lawyer friend who can handle the divorce quietly. You'll get visitation with Anna, of course." "How generous." "Don't be bitter, Garrett. This is better for everyone." I left her there, applying her lipstick for another man, and walked back to my garage. I sat in my workshop chair, surrounded by the tools and components that made sense to me, and tried to process what had just happened. My marriage was over. My wife was in love with another man. My daughter apparently preferred her mother's boyfriend to her own father. And Calvin Brooks thought he could threaten me into disappearing quietly. He was wrong about that last part. I started with Jennifer Walsh, Calvin's fiancée. She deserved to know what kind of man she was planning to marry. I created a fake email account and sent her the photos, along with a simple message. "Thought you should know what your fiancé does in his spare time?" Her response came within an hour. "Who is this? These photos could be faked." I sent her more evidence. Screenshots of Calvin's text messages, the motel receipt, a detailed timeline of his affair with my wife. I even included a link to the local newspaper's society page, where there was a photo of Calvin and Nora at a charity gala, looking very cozy for a boss and employee. The second response was different. "Thank you for telling me. I'm calling off the engagement." One down. Next, I targeted Calvin's professional reputation. I researched the law firm's partners and found that the managing partner, Richard Yates, was a deacon at the local Methodist church and had strong opinions about moral conduct. I sent him an anonymous package containing copies of all my evidence, along with a note suggesting he might want to look into Calvin's after-hours activities. Then I got creative. I knew Calvin's routine now. He picked up coffee every morning at the Starbucks on 5th Street, always parking in the same spot. I arrived early and waited. When he pulled up in his pristine Mercedes, I was ready. The magnetic signs I'd had printed were professional quality. "Honk if you think adultery is wrong" on one side, "I cheat on my fiancée" on the other. I slapped them on his car while he was inside, then sat in my truck to watch the show. Calvin emerged 10 minutes later to find a small crowd gathered around his car, reading the signs and taking pictures with their phones. His face went purple as he ripped off the magnets, but the damage was done. In a town this size, gossip traveled faster than electricity. The war escalated quickly after that. Calvin retaliated by calling the city inspector to report code violations at my house. I came home to find a notice on my door requiring expensive electrical updates that weren't actually necessary but would cost thousands to address. I responded by having pizza delivered to Calvin's office every hour on the hour, all paid for with cash so he couldn't trace it back to me. By the third delivery, the receptionist was getting annoyed. By the sixth, security was involved. He tried to get my business license revoked by filing false complaints with the state licensing board. I countered by creating a Yelp account and leaving detailed reviews of his legal services on behalf of imaginary clients, highlighting his unprofessional conduct and questionable ethics. The gloves were officially off, but Calvin's biggest mistake was involving Anna. He started picking her up from school, taking her to expensive restaurants, buying her things I couldn't afford. He was trying to win her loyalty, turn her completely against me. It worked for a while. Anna came home one day with a new iPhone, the latest model that cost more than I made in a month. "Calvin got it for me," she announced, waving it in my face. He said I shouldn't have to use that ancient thing anymore. My ancient thing was a 2-year-old phone that worked perfectly fine. You can't accept gifts like that from him, Anna. Why not? At least someone in this family has money to spend on nice things. I'm your father. I provide for you. You provide the bare minimum. Calvin actually cares about making me happy. It was like hearing Nora's words coming out of my daughter's mouth. Calvin wasn't just stealing my wife, he was stealing my family. That night, I sat in my garage workshop, staring at the camera feed from my phone. Calvin's Mercedes was in the driveway again, and through the kitchen window I could see him, Nora, and Anna sitting around the dinner table like a happy family, like I didn't exist. Frankie found me there an hour later. I'd given him a spare key months ago, back when we were friends instead of just two guys who shared a gym. "You look like hell," he said, settling into my spare chair. "Feel worse." "Heard about the pizza thing. Half the town's talking about it." "Good. Let them talk." Frankie was quiet for a moment, studying my face. "You know this isn't going to end well, right? This kind of war, nobody wins." "I'm not trying to win anymore, Frankie. I'm just trying to make sure Calvin loses." "What about Anna? What about your daughter?" That was the question that kept me awake at night. In my quest for revenge against Calvin, was I destroying my relationship with Anna? Was I becoming the villain in my own story? "I don't know," I admitted, "but I can't just roll over and let him take everything. I won't." Frankie nodded slowly. "Then you better be smarter than him, because if you're not, you'll lose more than just your wife." He was right, of course, but I was past caring about being smart. I was running on pure electricity now, and electricity always finds the path of least resistance. Calvin Brooks was about to discover he was standing in a puddle. The opportunity came 3 weeks later. Calvin was throwing a party at his lake house, a farewell to bachelorhood celebration, even though Jennifer had already called off the engagement. Apparently he was spinning the story as mutual decision, claiming they'd grown apart naturally. I knew about the party because Anna mentioned it. She wasn't invited, but Nora was helping him host it. "Mom's making her famous spinach dip," Anna said, like this was the most natural thing in the world. The lake house was 40 minutes outside town, isolated and perfect for what I had in mind. I drove out there the afternoon before the party to scout the location. Calvin's place was everything I'd expected: expensive, pretentious, and vulnerable. I returned that night with a toolbox full of supplies. First, I cut the power to his boat dock. Not permanently, just enough to eliminate the decorative lights he'd strung up for the party. In the dark, his guests would have to navigate by moonlight, and Calvin would spend the evening apologizing for the electrical problems. Next, I rigged his garage door opener to malfunction. It would open and close randomly throughout the night, making a horrible grinding noise each time. Again, nothing permanent, but annoying enough to ruin the ambiance of his sophisticated gathering. But my masterpiece was the sound system. Calvin had expensive speakers wired throughout the house, connected to a central control unit in his study. I spliced into the main cable and installed a small transmitter that would override his music at random intervals. The playlist I'd prepared was special, a collection of songs about cheating, lying, and betrayal, mixed with some choice voice recordings I'd made. The party started at 7. I parked on a hill overlooking the lake and watched through binoculars as guests arrived. Lawyers, judges, city council members. Calvin's entire professional network was there, along with their spouses. Nora moved through the crowd in a red dress I'd never seen before, playing hostess like she belonged there. At 8:30, I activated the first surprise. Calvin's smooth jazz was interrupted by Carrie Underwood's "Before He Cheats," blasting at full volume. I watched him rush inside to fix the problem, his face red with embarrassment. He managed to switch it off, but the damage was done. His guests were already whispering and laughing. 10 minutes later, the garage door started its grinding symphony. Calvin disappeared again, leaving Nora to make excuses to confuse guests who kept glancing toward the noise. The coup de grace came at 9 o'clock, right when Calvin was giving a toast about new beginnings and honest relationships. His voice was replaced by my recording, broadcast through every speaker in the house. This is Calvin Brooks, and I want everyone to know that I've been having an affair with Garrett Lane's wife for the past 6 months. While I was engaged to another woman, I was sneaking around with a married mother, destroying a family for my own selfish pleasure. I'm a liar, a cheat, and a coward who threatens innocent people when they stand up to me. The recording played for 30 seconds before Calvin managed to eliminate the power to the entire sound system. But 30 seconds was enough. In the sudden silence, I could see guests pulling out their phones, some already heading for their cars. I packed up my equipment and drove home, satisfied that Calvin's reputation was now as damaged as my marriage. But I wasn't done. The next morning, I visited every friend I'd lost during this war, guys who'd chosen sides or just gotten tired of the drama. I went to Mike Patterson first. We'd been friends since high school, but he'd stopped returning my calls after the pizza incident. "Garrett," he said when he opened his door, clearly uncomfortable. "What are you doing here?" "Came to say goodbye. Nora and I are getting divorced, and I'll probably be leaving town after it's final." Mike's expression softened. "I'm sorry, man. I heard things got pretty ugly between you and that lawyer." "They did, but I wanted you to know. Everything I did because he threatened me first. He tried to destroy my business, turn my daughter against me, take everything I'd worked for. I just fought back the only way I knew how." We talked for 20 minutes, and by the end, Mike was shaking his head in disgust. "I can't believe Calvin threatened you like that. If I'd known, you would have done the same thing I did." I had similar conversations with Tom Rodriguez, Steve Chen, and Danny Walsh, all the friends who distanced themselves during the conflict. I didn't ask for their friendship back. I just wanted them to understand that I wasn't the villain in this story. Most of them listened. A few even apologized for not supporting me. The final piece of my revenge was the simplest and most devastating. I waited until Calvin returned to work. Then I visited his law firm one last time. But instead of going to his office, I went to the break room where all the support staff gathered for lunch. I sat down with the secretaries, paralegals, and clerks, the people who really ran the place, and told them my story. Not the angry, bitter version I'd been living with for months, the honest version. How Calvin had pursued my wife, sent me threatening messages, tried to destroy my business and turn my daughter against me. How he'd lied to his fiancée, manipulated my family, and used his position to intimidate someone who couldn't fight back legally. I showed them the evidence I'd gathered, photos, text messages, recorded conversations. I let them draw their own conclusions. By the end of the week, Calvin Brooks was persona non grata at his own law firm. The managing partner called it a mutual parting of ways, but everyone knew he'd been forced out. His reputation in town was finished, his engagement was over, and his career was in ruins. Nora filed for divorce the following Monday. The divorce proceedings were surprisingly civil. Nora got the house. She could afford the payments with her paralegal salary, barely. I kept my tools, my truck, and my business. We split custody of Anna, though she made it clear she preferred staying with her mother. Calvin left town 3 weeks after the divorce was final. I heard he'd taken a job with a firm in Chicago, starting over where nobody knew his story. Nora never spoke to me about what happened between them after his reputation imploded, but I could see the disappointment in her face whenever Anna mentioned him. The friends I'd lost during the war gradually came back. Not all of them, but enough. Mike Patterson even hired me to rewire his basement, and we spent the afternoon talking like the old days, before lawyers and affairs and anonymous text messages complicated everything. Anna took longer to come around. She was angry about the divorce, angry about Calvin leaving, angry about having to choose between parents. But teenagers are resilient, and eventually she started spending weekends with me again. We didn't talk much at first, but we were both trying. 6 months after the divorce, I was cleaning out my garage workshop when I found the wireless camera I'd used to catch Nora and Calvin together. The device that had started this whole war, that had given me the evidence I needed to destroy them both. I held it in my hands for a long moment, remembering the rage I'd felt watching that first video, the satisfaction of planning each act of revenge, the hollow victory of Calvin's downfall. Then I dropped it in the trash can with the rest of the junk I was throwing away. Some things are better left broken. I was installing a new outlet in Mrs. Henderson's kitchen the next day when she brought me a cup of coffee and sat down at her table. "How are you doing, Garrett? Really doing?" Mrs. Henderson was 78 years old and had lived in the neighborhood longer than anyone. She'd watched my marriage fall apart from her front window, seen the lawyers and the fights and the aftermath. "I'm okay," I said, and realized I meant it. Getting by. Good. You know, I was married to my Harold for 52 years before he passed. We had our rough patches, believe me, but we never forgot that we were on the same team, even when we were fighting. I nodded, not sure what to say. The thing about revenge, she continued, is that it's like electricity. It lights things up for a while, but it burns out fast. Real satisfaction comes from building something new, not tearing down what's already broken. She was right, of course. I'd spent months destroying Calvin Brooks, and in the end, it hadn't made me feel better. It had just made me tired. What do you build after everything falls apart? I asked. Mrs. Henderson smiled. Whatever you want, dear. That's the beauty of starting over. That evening, I sat in my new apartment, a small place above the hardware store downtown, and made a list of things I wanted to build. A better relationship with Anna, a successful electrical business, maybe even a new relationship someday, with someone who wanted the same things I did. It was a short list, but it was mine. The last item on the list was the most important: learn to forgive. Not Calvin. I wasn't ready for that yet, and might never be. Not even Nora, though I was working on it for Anna's sake. But I needed to forgive myself for the man I'd become during those months of war, for the friendships I'd damaged and the bridges I'd burned in my quest for revenge. Mrs. Henderson was right about electricity. It burns bright and burns out fast. But it also powers new things, lights up dark places, makes connections that didn't exist before. I was ready to start building again. 2 years later, Anna graduated from high school. Both Nora and I attended the ceremony, sitting in different sections but both cheering when our daughter's name was called. Afterward, the three of us went to dinner at Anna's favorite restaurant, not as a family, but as three people who cared about each other despite everything that had happened. I'm proud of you, I told Anna as we waited for dessert. For graduating? For everything. For handling the divorce, for staying strong, for giving your old man another chance. Anna smiled. The first genuine smile she'd given me in months. You're not that old, Dad. Nora laughed, and for a moment it felt like old times. Not the bitter end of our marriage, but the good years before everything went wrong. What's next? Nora asked Anna. College in the fall, then maybe law school, like we talked about. I felt a pang at that. The we didn't include me, but I pushed it down. Anna had to make her own choices, follow her own path. My job was to support her, not control her. Whatever you decide, I said, I'll be proud of you. After dinner, I walked them to Nora's car. She'd traded in her old sedan for a newer model, nothing fancy but reliable. Calvin's promises of luxury had evaporated along with his career. Thank you, Nora said quietly while Anna was getting in the car. For what? For not making this harder than it had to be. For putting Anna first, even when we couldn't stand each other. I nodded. She's the best thing either of us ever did. Yes, she is. Nora hesitated, like she wanted to say something else. Finally, she asked, Do you ever wonder what would have happened if we'd tried harder? If we'd talked instead of just drifting apart? It was a question I'd asked myself 100 times. Sometimes. But we can't rewire the past, Nora. We can only work with the circuits we have now. She smiled at the electrical metaphor. Always the electrician. Always. They drove away, and I walked back to my apartment. It was a good life I was building, not the one I'd planned, but a good one nonetheless. I had my work, my friends, a relationship with my daughter that was slowly healing. I even had a date next weekend with Sarah, a teacher I'd met at the coffee shop. Nothing serious yet, but promising. The anonymous text that started it all was still saved on my phone, buried in a folder I never opened. Sometimes I thought about deleting it, erasing that first moment when my world shifted off its axis. But I kept it as a reminder of how quickly things can change, how important it is to pay attention to the warning signs before the whole system overloads. Calvin Brooks never contacted me again. I heard through the grapevine that he'd remarried in Chicago to a woman who didn't know his history. I hoped he'd learned something from our war, but I doubted it. Some people never learn to check their connections before they flip the switch. I'd learned that revenge is a circuit that always burns out in the end, leaving you in the dark. I'd learned that forgiveness is harder than hatred, but more sustainable. Most importantly, I'd learned that sometimes the best way to fix something broken is to build something new. Standing in my apartment, looking out at the city lights, I realized I was finally at peace with the man I'd become. Not the angry, bitter person I'd been during the war, but someone who'd been tested and come through it with his integrity mostly intact. The lights flickered once, an old building with old wiring, but they held steady. Sometimes that's all you can ask for. A system that works, connections that hold, and enough power to keep moving forward. I turned off the lights and went to bed, ready for whatever tomorrow might bring.